What's going on, everybody? It's your boy Payne. Welcome back to another Street Fighter Duel video. And that's right, guys, first tier list is going to be out today, and we're going to be focusing on probably the most important aspect of the game, and that is going to be the PVE challenge story mode and the progression. Alright, so I'm going to give you guys the breakdown of how this tier list is going to work and how I'm going to classify everything, because I think that's extremely important that we're all on the same page in terms of how these units are going to be ranked. Okay, so first thing I want to point out is the ranking will be based on a couple things. How good these units are going to be from early game, which is going to be stage 1 to 1540. How they're going to be good in early to mid game, which is 16 to 2540. How they are in the mid game itself, which is 26 to 32. Mid to end, which is 33 to 3640. And then finally end game, which is 37 to 41, which is currently the last stage in the global version that was just released. Okay, now these units are going to be classified based on their full max potential, including 6 vehicles and FS 30 or to 40. Okay, they're going to be how they fit the mold in every team and what they bring to the table for PvE. So don't expect some of these units, you might be surprised in terms of where they are because of a lot of testing. Some units just don't fit the mold. Some units just don't work as well as others in story mode. Specifically, again, we're doing PvE story mode, so I want to make that clear so we're all on the same page in terms of the ratings. Okay, so with that being said, max potential, including where they are in terms of how far they can take you to early to end game. And we're going to start off with double S. Okay, we're going to get those out of the way now. Everybody knows Bison, the most pivotal character probably. He is currently still being used from beginning to end. If you guys get him, you know he's one of the only units in the game that can be used as an A and still actually function really, really well. So there's really no unit out there better than Bison in terms of PvE progression outside of one other character. And that's going to be a pretty pivotal part, and that's going to be B-Zang. B-Zang may be cheesy in terms of what he brings. He may be annoying to use after a while because it's just the same repetitive thing, but you can't deny his utility and his usefulness in PvE. Pretty much, without him, your progression halts at a certain point. So you do need to get him up, so he's 110% required. So SS is considered the top of the class. There's nobody like them out there, and they bring just so much to the table that progression halts without them, okay? Next up is going to be MH Ken. Even as an A MH Ken, and you guys can go shout out to my boy Pika, you can go watch his A video of Ken. He still brings so much to the table with 3 trigger combos, 2 trigger combos, and an incredible ult that knocks back, amazing debuff and buff to your team. Just so much offered for a unit that makes him almost essential to specifically mid to end game. If you have him early game and you just started with him, he's going to pretty much take you the whole way through. So absolutely a must-have unit for PvE. If you don't have him, unfortunately you missed out. If you do have him, you know how good he is. So even as an A unit, guys, very, very powerful. So definitely keep an eye out for that. Okay, next up is going to be the other big unit, and that's going to be Rose. So Rose is unique in a sense that she's one of the only real control units in the game. Great DPS if you want her to be, but even better buffer, and she gives buffs pretty much for every stat. That's crit, attack, pressure, and I believe speed. So not only that, but if she can give you all 4 buffs with no duplication. She has a decent heal, and with the 6 card advantage, obviously she does even more damage and healing. So definitely a unique character in her own way. Will pretty much take you as far as possible in PvE. Okay, so those are essentially my SS, like essentials. If you have them, they'll take you the furthest. Even Rose with an A copy with her C2 buff will still take you far enough in PvE mode and still be usable. Of course, as you get her further up in endgame, she's going to need to rank up, but that's essentially the same thing for everybody. But these 4 guys are the pivotal pieces for PvE progression. All right, let's move on to S+. Now, the S+ category is going to be must-have units, right? The ones on top are essentials, like they're just good no matter where you put them, but the S+ are essentials. So the ones that are going to carry you just as far with these guys in the team, okay? So let's start off with Akuma. Now, the reason why Akuma, I'm going to explain this real quick because he's brand new and a lot of people are going to be like, you're crazy for not putting him in SS. Hear me out. There's a big reason behind it. In PvE, because how essential B-Zang is and a lot of other C2 combos, he takes up a pivotal spot in the C2 section. you should always choose Bizang over Akuma in a C2 combination for PvE. You'd rather have the interrupt and stun to be able to continue to DPS while everyone's alive versus pulling off another DPS move just in order to kill an anchor or to kill a front. And just so we're all clear, front is obviously the front line, middle is middle, and anchor is the back, okay? So Akuma in PvE specifically, you'll see him much higher in bosses, right, and PvP. But in PvE, he sits on an S+ because he does do secondary attacks. So he'll do the front attack with incredible power, but then he'll also hit the back line. But it's not as good as an AoE, for example, in my opinion, because AoE obviously hits everybody. It hits the middle as well, right? So keep that in mind. He does bring a lot to the table, like lifesteal. He has the extreme and the conqueror buffs, but for PvE purposes, just because he takes up that C2 essential combo for Bizang and other units, he falls back a little bit. Okay, just so we're clear on that one. All right, moving on to the next one. Sea Viper, absolutely deadly. Like if you're looking for a DPS that can carry you extremely far and push the limits for you for your DPS, Sea Viper is it. Quite honestly, she will push you to end game as well. Like she's almost an essential part. I almost was thinking of putting her in double S, but obviously she doesn't sit on the same class as the other four there. But she's an incredible DPS. Like backline damage, triple attack, including AoE. Her C3 AoE does flame and thunder damage. Her C2 does detonation and AoE damage, so she's a full package for damage. So she's probably the best, I would say one of the best assassins in the game, next to probably Akuma. So do not sleep on her, guys. If you have her, build her. Not to mention, she also is one of the best assists in the game for damage too. So Sea Viper, absolutely an S+, very close to SS in my opinion in terms of damage, but again, she can't sit on the same class as the other four just because they bring so much more to the table from a utility perspective, right? All right, so let's move on to the next one here. Dalsim, also S+. Dalsim is unique in a sense that his assist is important, right? Again, in PvE. Also, you can use him with his mass AoE damage. So he does Yoga Flame, including his Yoga Catastrophe, which is the AoE Fireball. The fact that he covers burn and he buffs himself to do an additional Fireball makes him a force to be reckoned with. C3 combos are really rare to find with mass AoE, and he fills that gap pretty quickly. So I would highly recommend, if you have a Flame team, he and Sea Viper work really well together. So I would say definitely Dalsim at an S+ for damage and buffing himself. Dalsim is definitely a unit you want on your main DPS team. If not team 1, team 2 or 3, he'll cover that split like fabulously. And speaking of other flame units, we're going to go on to the next one, and that's going to be F Blanca. Now, he is probably the best DPS right now for AoE in the game, easily, bar none. And again, this is not by order, guys. This is just where they belong, okay? Blanca is a unique unit in the sense that he does flame damage. He also does something called Wildfire, where he will buff your units with defense and attack based on if he's getting flame damage or if he's doing flame damage, right? And that Wildfire can spread to other units, and they can also get the buffs too. So not only is he performing some of the best AoE damage in the game, including burn and flame damage, but he's also providing your team and himself amazing buffs that can also up your DPS. And if you saw, he's pretty much being essential in every single fight for PvE, PvP, as well as bosses. So he's now across the board as one of the best DPS units. And not to mention, he's a tank, so he's not squishy. So if you need somebody to survive plus DPS, F Blanca is your man. Okay, so highly recommend S+ him. Amazing unit. Don't sleep on that unit at all. Okay. All right, guys. Moving on to the next one. We're gonna put let's put Guile. Guile's an S+. And the reason why I put Guile so high up there is a lot of free-to-play units are now just discovering him as somebody who can push your account really far, and he doesn't stop. Endgame wise, he's still one of the best DPS. He does incredible AoE, has Saber buff on himself. He also does the Flash Kick AoE as well too, and he does pretty good single target with C1. So he does cover a lot of the issues that you may have for DPS, especially AoE. If you're lacking it, Guile will be one of the better AoE units in the game, and his damage is he's not a slouch in damage, so definitely use him as your main AoE damage dealer if you need to. So Guile, I would highly recommend, get him up if you have him. You'll see massive results with him, and his FS30 is also really good too, so you guys can push him now. As a assist, he lacks a little bit, only because he provides the saber buff to anybody who is a ranged unit, and not everybody who's on him. So keep that in mind when you're doing that. So definitely still an S plus for damage and the fact that he has a saber buff, but his assist is a little lackluster. So he could technically sit in the S because of that, but I think because of the amount of damage output that he has, he's still worth having on the S plus for sure. All right, let's kind of change the pace here from DPS to tanks. E Honda and Zangief. Both of them are absolutely must-haves. Like, you need to build them, especially for end game. If you guys are planning to get to 30, like 36 plus, these guys are going to be pretty much a standard for each team, especially because you need multiple teams and you need tanks, right? So having Bison is great, but you also need other tanks to support you. These two are the best of their class. They do everything well. Desperation for Hyundai, he can do a stun with the C1. He has Desperation, which lets him be immune to damage for X amount of seconds. He also has a heal during Desperation, and overall just a super tanky unit with a lot of utility, right? So great unit. Plus he has the bulletproof, which helps him take less damage, and the whole team take less damage from ranged attacks such as Giles and all those, and combat Giles, right? So really important tank. You're gonna need him, build him up for sure. And then Zangief is just as pivotal. He is all the defense essentially, and he also gives damage reduction on all elemental damage, so flame damage, thunder damage, and soul damage. So because you're going to be fighting a lot of double Dhalsims, you're going to be fighting a lot of double combat Giles and stuff, you want that damage reduction. You're going to need that damage reduction, so he provides that for you. And not to mention, his 6-card passive actually eliminates passive, so you can actually take out Bisons without taking out the whole team. You can take out anybody else's passive that's important to them, making him a pretty critical part of a tank team or of a second or first team lineup, especially when you're fighting bigger units and multiple units of the same thing. So again, the Dhalsims, the Bisons, etc. Right? So do not sleep on these two tanks, guys. You really do need them. Okay, let's go Jury and Gen. So these two are gonna sit up here for multiple reasons. Okay, because again, I'm looking at maxing out the units, right? Jury and Gen are two assassins who bring very similar kits but are completely different at the same time. Okay, and I'll explain what I mean by that. Jury is a better AoE unit and has mass dodge, and her Feng Shui engine is an incredible buffing and damage dealing move. So she's one of the best single target damage dealers in the game. So if you need to take out someone like Abel who provides shields and you don't want that to start spreading constantly, or even a Honda, use her to take them out. She's great at taking out tanks, and she's amazing at dodge, so she has some really good survivability. And not to mention, her C3 has small range, but if you use something like Zhang with her, where he vacuums them in, that C3 can take out multiple units at a time. So very powerful, still very sought after in PvE, so really good unit. Now again, on the other hand, is a little better in my opinion, because he has, with 6 cars, he has a revival, where if he does retribution and he kills somebody with it, he gets back to 100%, but still stays alive for another 10 seconds before he dies. Plus his mirror image does additional damage on top of that, and at the same time he has 2 different styles which gives him buffs, so he can shield himself and increase his dodge, and at the same time he's one of the best single target damage dealers in the game, and his mirror image actually allows people like Sea Viper to hit that rather than him. So Gen is going to bring a ton of DPS to your team. Unfortunately, it's all single damage, but it is great at taking out bosses or units that are remaining. But it doesn't take away the fact that his utility for himself and that mirror image bring a lot to the table. So still really good units. Unfortunately, they are being power crept at the moment, but in PvE they still bring enough to the table where they're worth building. But I would say they're probably now hitting the spectrum of S to S+. So I'll leave them an S+ for now, just because I know how useful they have been to get me to my point, which is stage 39 now. But they have now started to fall off. But in second, third teams, they're going to be your main DPS units for sure. So keep that in mind, okay? And I think for the most part, guys, that should round up our S+ units, right? That's pretty good, I think. All right, let's move on to the S now. We're going to bring Chun-Li into the S first. So with her FS 30 plus the fact that she's a combo battery, she's going to be pretty critical to your growth in progression. Not to mention all of her AoE moves and the fact that she feeds off of armor breaks with her C3. So Chun-Li is still one of the better units in the game. She does fall off end game a little bit, but with the right team, she can still provide quite a bit of super combo and a tank to it that can protect her. She can still bring quite a bit of utility to your team and actually pretty good damage. So mid to end, you start to see a little bit of a drop off in Chun-Li, but she still is one of the better units in second, third teams especially. Okay, so she'll sit in the S for now. Abel for sure deserves to be on the S list. His shield, which provides immunity, plus with his 6 cars, that shield will jump around to random other units and provide immunity damage to them. And not to mention, he's just overall just provides shield with his C1 and his C2. So great tank. Unfortunately, he's a one-trick pony, but still brings enough to the table for you guys to be able to use him, especially as he's a great assist too, right, for other tanks. So I'm putting him up there for that reason too. So he does bring enough to the table for him to still be classified as a you know, like a really good unit, but in comparison to the other tanks, he's just not as good as Honda or Zangief because they just bring so much more, right? So Abel's still a good unit. Still definitely build him if you have him and he's one of your better ranked versions, but keep in mind he's not the best tank in the game, so just note that before you start building him too much. All right, let's go over to Elena. Now I put her in S, not an S plus, because in end game you have the ability to still use Rose. She may, you know what, she might fall under S plus in end game, but in the beginning to mid game she's not absolutely essential, because with Bizang stunning a lot, you can get away with 0 damage to your team, and she just is a C1 combo slot that's being used up. But in mid to end, at end game, you have to have her. Like, there's no other option here. Like in tower, which is included in this, right? Or in stage mode, which is obviously the main goal here, she becomes like a absolute critical role to your team. So you have to have her. She's a must-have for that. So I'm gonna put her in S because of where she sits in terms of her most usefulness, which is mid to end game. But from, let's say, early to early mid, you can get away without actually using her if you do the proper timing with the interrupts. So she'll sit in S. We may bring her up a little bit eventually. We'll see if there's any of the healers introduced, but that's where she's going to sit for now, just again because she's not required. Going over to the next one, Fashion Sakura. So I'm going to put her in, I was really debating on S plus for her, but here's my only gripe with her. She's a pay-to-win character. Like, you can only buy her, so she loses points for that. Which I probably should have put a criteria on there. She's the only unit you have to buy. Like, everyone else, you can at least work overtime and get them. For her, you have to pay the money up front. Like, if you want her, you get her. She's legendary. What's unique about her is she's a damage dealer, plus she's I've done a full showcase on her. She's an off healer, and she also does damage reduction to your team and debuffs to the opponent. So she brings a lot to the table as a support unit and a damage dealer, but unfortunately, because of that price tag on there as pay to win, like complete pay to win, like there's no other way to get her now, she loses a little bit of points. But if you have bought her, like, she'll do work for you, trust me. And she's great across the board for all content, so no one to slouch at for sure. Okay, moving on, let's go to Training Cammy. So not higher up for a reason. She's pure single target damage, and she does require the 6 cars to really maximize it, and she does for the most part need somewhat of a shock team to be really like powerful. But even on her own with the 6 cars, she does way too much damage to ignore. The only problem with her is she is very, for PvE purposes, it's really tough to put her any higher because cleat teams do better, right? Single target damage teams like her, for example, she'd be SS in bosses 100%. But for PvE, she sits at an S. She still does incredible damage, does shock, and she does have a self heal, and I think she heals the party as well a little bit, but just not enough utility to put her any higher. So I'm gonna keep her there for now. But again, you will need her for bosses, so she's definitely like one of the top units. So again, this is PvE, guys, right? So Jury and Jen will drop, and Cammy will go up for bosses. PvE purposes, they still take the cake because they just offer a lot more from a PvE perspective for utility. Okay, okay, move on to the next one here. So let's see. I'm debating here. Okay, so I want to put Mikado and T-Hawk in here as well as tanks because they're really, really good. The tank classes are actually pretty impeccable, to be honest with you. They're both really good. The problem with her is she's great in the beginning, but end game, because she takes so long to build up, it takes some time for her to really get going, and sometimes she can be one shot. So I was very much debating on putting her in A rather than an S, but I think with the proper gear setup and everything, she's still really good. That her assist is one of the better assists in the game because it gives you defense plus attack up if you build in the key focus versus the key flow. So for both roles she fits that really well, okay? And T-Hawk's actually really good as a tank in PvE because there's so many debuffs going around, right? And he cleanses and he heals for that reason. So T-Hawk's unique in that sense. Not, again, he's more of a support tank than he is a real true tank in my opinion, but really, really good tank overall anyways. So I put him in the same class as everybody else. So tank wise I'd probably go 1, 2, maybe 3, 4 to be honest, and 5 is the last one in my opinion, and based on testing until end game, right? So still definitely S units, still worth building for sure, especially at the end game when you need multiple teams. But at the beginning, you can really go without these two in your team. These two could still do a lot more for you, even early to mid, but these two are not essentials. Tanks in general, guys, are not really essential for early to mid game, but when you start getting into like mid to end game, they start becoming a lot more useful and needed, essentially, like for your team. The A class. All right, so Mad Ryu for sure. He is still a powerhouse unit. Still really, really good damage even at mid game. The problem is with end game, he just starts to get one shot because of the amount of HP that he sacrifices. Even his shield is not enough to protect him, and sometimes heals are not enough to keep him up. So early to mid game, he's definitely way up there for damage. So he'd probably be like an S plus for that. But starting to mid to end game, you start to notice his decline quite a bit because of the fact that he sacrifices so much HP, and it's just, you can't one-shot units anymore. So right, so for PvE purposes, he's kind of dropping there for that reason. All right, Guy here, I was really debating on putting him in S, but I'm gonna put him in A for now, only because he's so damn squishy, and he only has single target damage. So unlike Viper, who does AoE and single target and back row, he does do back row, which is great. But as an assassin, you want a more variety in your kit, right? And C Viper already brings all that. So the Guy is almost like a backup assassin to her if you need to just still take out back units and mid units, but just not, unfortunately doesn't bring enough in my opinion. He is slept on a little bit. He does provide great buffs, but if you have to compare between him and C Viper already takes the cake, and I wouldn't focus on Guy in that case because you don't need multiple assassins unless you're doing multiple teams. But even in there, like Akuma now does the back row. So again, I can't justify putting him any further. Some people may disagree on that one, some won't, but that's just my take on it, right? All right, Blanca was a tough one, guys. He's such a good unit, and he does a counterattack. He's really tanky. He does thunder damage, and I mean, he brings so much to the table, and I almost just want to put him in S because I love his kit, and I think he's such a good and overlooked unit. So I might just toss him in there, quite honestly. I don't think he deserves it. I think he's better than that, especially end game. You're going to notice a big trend of people coming in hot with their attacks and their speed, and you want a counter-attacker like Blanca to help you out. And not to mention, like I said, he's not squishy. So good DPS, a lot of AoE, and a great counter with damage. So I'm going to put him up there, actually. He deserves an S, so we're going to keep him there, okay? So let's go with that. Street Poison. The reason why she's not higher here is because she's really built to be a boss unit, but she does give you a charm if you don't have Toxic Love, and the buffs are still pretty useful, and not to mention she does do an off heal. So unfortunately she's just not, she takes a while to build up. So in PvE you don't have that luxury to really build up over time. You really want to get the interrupts and stuns in and get going and do as much damage as you can. So I'm going to put her in A for now in PvE only. The charm is very useful, but it's 3 seconds and it's a low chance. And then the buffs take time to stack, 5 times for you to really get going. So in boss fights where it's like a whole 90 seconds to kill something versus a PvE fight where it can last 10 seconds to 40 seconds, you really aren't getting the full utility and her full kit potential because of that. So she'll sit in A for now because she still does bring enough, but unfortunately not enough to really justify going any further, okay? All right, here's another one that I had a really hard time with, Cammy. So she is really good against bosses, probably one of the top units for bosses. Where she struggles a little bit, in my opinion, is not her kit itself, which is great. She does a lot of damage and she does armor break. What her biggest issue is, she actually, every time she does a move, she goes into the enemy team. Now, animations is something a lot of people don't consider. Like, yes, the kit looks nice, but if you're doing a cannon arrow or cannon strike and you're going into the opponents, you're now first in line to get hit. And she's not a tank, she's backline. So she is really easy to one-shot, making her an A unit for me in PvE, because if you don't time it right and she's going in constantly into the opponents, you're losing one of your top DPS very early. So keep that in mind, guys. When you're playing this game, animation does matter a lot. If you have a unit that's constantly diving into the opponent's moves, you're gonna lose her really quickly. So Cammy for sure is gonna sit in A for that reason alone, but in bosses you'll see her ranking go up. Alright, I think that pretty much covers most of who needs to be there. I was really debating on putting Adon, and you know what, Combat Guile and Adon I think are worth up here. And hear me out in this, okay? So Combat Guile has mass HP, he has a Dispel, which is really good. It's low percentage, but it does happen quite often because he attacks so much. And not to mention his AoE damage is pretty impressive. So Combat Guile, I think, is another unit that's pretty slept on because people don't like or understand his kit that well. But he actually does do quite a bit for you with the dispelling, the fact that he has mass HP, like a lot of HP for a back unit, and the fact that he does really good AoE. So not as good as OG Guile, which is way up here, but he shouldn't really be slept on. Like if you do need a utility with or a support with damage included, he's really good for that. So there I would put him in A still. And Adon's another one that people sleep on. His hunter mark or his prey or whatever, which increases damage as long as somebody has it on there, and the fact that he does bleed and he has a counter attack actually make him pretty useful in a lot of fights. And not to mention the fact that there are not a lot of good flame units for damage outside of Viper and Dalsim. Flame unfortunately is the lowest class for most people, but Adon does bring enough to the table to make him useful. So I put him in A, but that's probably as far as I go. And quite honestly, Dudley was almost up there as well too. His counter punch and his dodge is really good. So if you're looking for a unit to be able to counter a lot of people's damage coming in, he's great for that. His counter punch does a lot of damage, and not to mention he has a lot of dodge, so he will survive. So really good unit for damage early on. He falls off a little bit at the end, of course, and that's why he's sitting in A. A lot of these units will fall off closer to the end, unfortunately, so they're sitting in this section for that reason for the most part. Okay, all right, moving on to the B and C section. So I'm gonna put Fei Long in B because he's so niche, and his assist is great, but it requires the assist fighter to survive for it to still be active. He's very niche in terms of he really fits only well in a flame team. He has a stun for a C1, which is good, and he does flame damage himself and burn himself, but his main utility is his flame vulnerability, which you do need to flame damage team 4. So he's very niche, so he's gonna sit there. DiCaprio's good too. She's decent, I should say, sorry. Her execute's good. The problem is it doesn't crit. Even though it does 300 to 600% damage based on HP, the crit multiplier of crit damage matters way more in my opinion. So I think DiCaprio just doesn't bring enough to the fold to be anything higher than a B, at least from my experience. And her assist is every 20 seconds, so it's timed. So again, overall her kit's not the greatest, and that's just my opinion on it. Hugo as a tank, unfortunately, falls off pretty hard. Is still better than DJ in my opinion because he does have a heal, he has a shield that he can do, but unfortunately, he just doesn't bring much to the table, and the other tanks just overpower and overclass him in every way. So Hugo's down there. Mayor Cody, his duel is great. I love his duel because when he duels with somebody, he does 15% more damage to that target, and if he beats that target, he gets a buff of defense and attack for himself, and as an assist he does provide you that same utility, which is really good. But unfortunately, as a flame unit, he's just not one of the better ones out there, and most people don't use him because at end game and stuff he's rarely there. I could be wrong about him, so let me know on this one. He might be an A, but I've personally noticed using him as an S+5, I haven't had much outside of the assist point, and duel itself is great, but again, if you lose, duel's gone, so the debuff is gone, and you'll see the duel icon. It's like a wrench or something. All right, moving on to poison, and let's just add these guys in here. All right, these guys here, you know what, I'm gonna put him in there too. So all of these guys here are okay. They'll take you mid to probably to mid game, and then you start noticing differences here. Like some of these units are much better for bosses and PvP. Like for example, Black Rose, like his Black Rose debuff is really not that useful for PvP or PvE. Sorry, Yin and Yang almost belong together all the time. He does crit up, but they pretty much only work well together for the most part. So and Poison has a good AoE kit, but the silence is such a small percentage chance of landing. That I just don't find her to be a useful DPS at the end of the day. And then lastly, DJ. Unfortunately, the shield based on his attack is just not enough. His C1 stun or his alt stun is not enough to really make him viable in my opinion, especially at mid to end game. Some people may disagree with this, but I think out of all the tanks, he's probably the worst tank in the game. But that's pretty much it, guys. There is your list. This is the PvE list. We'll be doing PvP and boss list next. If you have any issues with this list, I was going to do a live stream in order to have you guys kind of dispute it with me. But now just let me know in the comment section, and I'm more than happy to explain how I feel about certain units and debate with you guys whether they belong where I put them or if they belong in different places. But I'm more than happy to hear all of your suggestions. Alright guys, this is Payne. Hope you enjoyed the video. We'll talk soon.